Bull Bear Buzz Podcast for decoding markets, fueling minds. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a subject that's, well, it's fascinated people for ages and still sparks a lot of debate. Government confiscation of gold. You, our listener, you've probably heard gold talked about as, a safe asset, especially when things feel uncertain.
Right. The go-to safe haven.
Exactly. But then this key question comes up. Well, what's the actual history here?
Yeah.
Have governments really stepped in and, taken control of private gold?
It's a really critical question, actually. It gets right to the heart of how we think about wealth and, the power dynamics between us and the state.
And the trust we put in those systems.
Precisely. So in this deep dive, our goal is to explore those historical moments, the motivations behind them, and importantly, how relevant this all is today. We'll be drawing on quite a range of sources you've pulled together.
Yeah, we've got a good spread. There's a brief history of gold confiscations that gives us the historical backbone.
Crucial context.
Then we'll look at central bank reserves, data from the World Gold Council. And for the bigger picture, geopolitics, economic warfare, we've got stuff from OM5, London Gold Exchange.
Understanding the why now.
Right. And current market buzz from Saxo Bank, ET Markets. We'll even touch on Fort Knox, some recent chatter there via the Economic Times.
Ah, yes, the Fort Knox questions.
And the RBI, moving gold back. An idea about using IMF gold for climate relief and really key, where you might safely store precious metals.
So the mission basically is to pull the key insights from all of that.
Exactly. Connect the dots, give you a clearer picture of this whole complex issue, especially as you think about gold and, your own understanding of finance.
Okay, so let's start with maybe a foundational point. This idea of governments taking gold, it's not some weird one-off event from ancient history. Our sources make it really clear this has happened again and again. When governments needed resources, gold was, valuable and easy to move. It often became a target.
That's a great point. And that brief history source points out the methods weren't always the same. It wasn't just grab and go.
Right. Different tactics.
Sometimes they just declared private ownership illegal. You just couldn't have it. Or they canceled financial contracts that had gold clauses.
Wiped out the obligation to pay in gold.
And then, of course, there was direct physical expropriation.
Yeah.
Just taking it. Governments got pretty creative when they wanted that gold.
Looking at the U.S. specifically, history shows, 4 main periods where gold ownership got seriously disrupted?
Yeah, seems like it. The War of 1812, first up. That saw gold clauses in contracts just invalidated.
So debts didn't have to be paid in gold anymore.
Right. And they closed the mints, too, which messed with normal gold transactions.
Then the Civil War. That was much more intense, obviously.
Definitely. Actual physical confiscation happened then, according to the sources. Plus another round of canceling those gold clauses.
That Confiscation Act of 1861 is mentioned as key there. It shows the government was ready to seize assets, including gold, that might help the other side.
But the really famous one, the one everyone thinks of in the U.S., is the Great Depression, right? 1933.
Absolutely. FDR's Executive Order 6102. That mandated citizens turn in most of their gold bullion and coins.
And the penalty wasn't trivial.
No. Imprisonment if you didn't comply. It's a stark example of, state authority overriding private property during a crisis.
It sounds pretty shocking today, doesn't it? Being legally forced to hand over your gold or risk jail time.
It really does. And the source highlights it wasn't optional. You had to surrender it at the going rate, $20.67 an ounce.
Though they let you keep a little bit.
A small amount, yeah. Up to $100 in gold coins, apparently, which wasn't a huge sum even then.
And then came the follow-up act.
Right, the Gold Reserve Act of 1934.
Yeah.
That basically cemented government control, suspended any remaining gold clauses, and, crucially, revalued gold to $35 an ounce.
Ah, so they made people sell low.
People got the $20.67.
And then immediately revalued it higher.
Effectively, yeah. The government benefited from the higher value of the gold it had just collected.
That's quite something. Significant point. The government profiting from its own policy.
You could certainly argue that. And the last U.S. example mentioned is Nixon in 71, ending Bretton Woods.
Ending the dollar's direct convertibility to gold internationally.
Exactly. Not a direct confiscation from citizens like FDR's order, but it fundamentally shifted gold's role in the whole global money system.
And it wasn't just the U.S. doing this sort of thing.
Oh no, far from it. The brief history source mentions others. Nazi Germany is a major example, confiscating gold from citizens from annexed territories.
They even went after central banks' gold, didn't they?
They did, like the Austrian Central Bank after the Anschluss in 1938, Australia, Great Britain. They also had periods of government intervention with private gold.
So looking across all these historical cases, what was the main driver? Why did they do it?
The sources really emphasize one main reason: money, raising funds, especially during wars or really bad economic times.
Makes sense. Gold was available, universally accepted wealth, an obvious thing to target when the government coffers were empty.
Exactly, which is different perhaps from today in many places. As the brief history suggests, now we have fiat money systems.
Meaning currencies aren't directly backed by gold or silver.
Right. So theoretically, governments and central banks have less direct need to grab gold. It's not the core of the monetary base anymore.
Which links to that interesting Ayn Rand quote the source included.
Huh.
Something about destroyers targeting money first.
Yeah. Whenever destroyers appear among men, they start by destroying money. Destroyers seize gold and leave to its owners a counterfeit pile of paper.
Looking at those historical confiscations, you can kind of see her point, can't you? Even if you don't buy the whole philosophy, it taps into gold's historical role as stable money.
It absolutely does. It highlights that deep connection and suggests controlling gold could be seen as a way to control people's financial lives.
It's also worth remembering, as the historical overview notes, that the U.S. band didn't just disappear after the Depression.
No, Eisenhower expanded it in '61. Gave the Treasury power to demand gold surrender during wartime.
It wasn't fully legal again until '74.
That's right. President Ford signed Public Law 93-373, finally legalizing private ownership again. Took quite a while.
Okay, let's pause on the history there. So while gold isn't officially money in most places now, that fear of confiscation, it lingers for gold investors.
It does. The source acknowledges that, but also suggests that the risk might be lower today, simply because gold isn't as big a slice of the total private wealth pie as it once was.
That's a really important calculation, isn't it? What percentage of wealth does it represent?
Right. But the report also makes a very shrewd point. Any valuable asset can potentially be targeted for seizure in some way.
True.
And look at countries where gold still has huge cultural or practical weight: China, India, Russia, Turkey, Iran.
Places where it's still seen almost as money.
Exactly. And in those places, you often see tighter rules around owning it and trading it.
It's like those governments get gold's enduring power maybe a bit more. We're also seeing more scrutiny elsewhere, like Germany lowering the threshold for anonymous gold buying.
Hints at authorities wanting a better handle on where wealth is stored, even if it's not direct confiscation.
So does that bring up the question, given current government debt levels, quantitative easing, all that, could there be a renewed temptation to, go after private wealth?
The brief history source considers that, but it points out gold might be, maybe 1% of total global wealth now? Relatively small.
So maybe not the biggest target anymore?
Possibly. Governments might look at bigger pools like the bond market if they were really desperate. Still, a sobering thought, as you said.
It is. Okay, let's shift to the market right now. ET Markets is reporting gold prices hitting record highs, above $3,350 an ounce.
Yeah, significant surge, attracting a lot of capital. Seems investors are getting nervous about traditional safe havens like U.S. Treasuries.
That feels like a definite shift towards perceived safety.
And what's really striking is that analysis cited by ET Markets from the Kobesi letter saying gold is trading like we are in a depression.
Wow. That's strong language.
It is. And the fact gold has beaten both the S&P 500 and U.S. Treasuries quite significantly over the last few years. Well, it backs that up. Investors are clearly seeking shelter.
And it's not just individuals, right? O.M. Sheep talks about geopolitical shifts.
The freezing of Russian assets, for example, that's pushing some countries to diversify away from the dollar.
Even towards currencies like the renminbi, despite the risks.
Yeah, despite concerns about market infrastructure or geopolitical issues with China, it really underscores gold's role as a fundamental diversifier when things get shaky globally.
It just reinforces that idea of gold as a universally recognized store of value, doesn't it? Especially when trust in currencies or systems wobbles.
Exactly. And London Gold Exchange really hammers this point home too, explaining how gold can help sanctioned nations kind of bypass financial roadblocks.
Because it's harder to freeze or seize internationally.
Precisely. It gives them a bit of economic breathing room, allows them to maintain some activity.
And on a slightly different tack, that idea about the IMF possibly selling some gold for climate debt relief.
Yeah, reported by Futurity.org.
It really throws into sharp relief how much gold's value has ballooned since it was deposited with them. Puts a dollar figure on that long-term store of value idea.
It does, and it shows even huge institutions like the IMF see the immense value in their gold holdings and are thinking about how to use it for current global problems.
So it's still being seen as a tool to navigate crises, just maybe differently than outright confiscation.
In this case, yes, a very different context.
Okay, so if direct confiscation risk for individuals is maybe lower in many places today, what about where you keep your gold? That Safe House article really digs into this, right? A jurisdictional risk.
Absolutely critical. Owning it is one thing, but where you store it is just as important, maybe more so.
And the article points back to confiscation risk itself as a key factor there. Reminds us of that U.S. ban from 33 to 74.
Right. But it's broader than just confiscation. Political instability, risk of war, civil unrest, unfavorable laws or regulations. All these things in a particular country could put your assets at risk.
So where does the Safe House point for safer options? Which jurisdictions come out on top?
Well, it strongly suggests Singapore and Switzerland as the top contenders for offshore storage.
Okay, why them specifically?
Both offer a strong package, really. Switzerland has that long history of political stability, strong laws, financial security, respect for rule of law, plus neutrality.
That famous Swiss neutrality.
Singapore, meanwhile, scores incredibly high on governance transparency. It's a major global financial hub, seen as having Asia's safest banks. Very business-friendly.
It's interesting. Switzerland's bank secrecy isn't what it once was, and the Credit Suisse thing might worry some.
True, there's been shifts towards transparency, and the rescue was significant, but that core neutrality still holds appeal.
And Singapore's low crime rate, linked to strict gun laws, definitely adds to the security image.
Exactly. The article highlights those points: commitment to rule of law, track record of safeguarding assets. It also mentions Fort Knox, doesn't it? That famous U.S. depository.
Yeah, the Economic Times piece talked about the recent speculation around it.
Yeah.
Figures like Elon Musk, Senator Mike Lee questioning the transparency of the gold reserves there.
Because there hasn't been a full independent audit since the 50s.
Since 53, yeah.
Yeah.
Which definitely lets conspiracy theories bubble up. Apparently even Trump asked about it.
Mm-hmm. And while the Treasury says, oh, we do regular audits, that lack of full public transparency keeps feeding doubts.
Especially when you remember a lot of that gold originally came from the 1930s confiscation we talked about.
It's a potent historical echo, isn't it? Ties right back. Okay, finally, let's touch on gold and economic warfare. London Gold Exchange covered this. It's not just a passive asset.
No, it can be an active tool.
Exactly. It's universally accepted value. So for sanctioned nations, it can be a way around financial restrictions, keep some economic activity going.
Because it's not tied to specific financial systems that can be easily blocked.
Right. Harder to freeze, harder to seize by international powers. History shows this strategic importance. Ancient times, colonialism, world wars.
And the argument is, with sanctions becoming more common.
Gold's importance in this context is likely to grow. Nations will look for financial security and leverage outside the usual channels.
Okay, quite a journey through history in the present day. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main takeaways for our listeners on gold confiscation?
I think first, confiscation has a real significant history, often tied to governments needing cash during crises. Second, while the risk might be different today because money systems have changed.
The fiat system versus gold backing.
Right. The potential for governments to want or need to control wealth hasn't vanished. Third, gold is still playing a massive role in geopolitics as a haven, yes, but also as a tool in economic conflict.
And
fourth, crucially for anyone holding gold, where you store it matters immensely. Jurisdictional risk is real. Places like Singapore and Switzerland offer distinct advantages for security and stability.
That sums it up really well. Which leads us nicely into our final thought for you, the listener. Given everything we've discussed, the history, the current economic climate, the political shifts, what does the enduring allure of gold, and all this talk about controlling it and storing it safely, what does that really suggest about the future? About your future, your wealth, your financial security?
It's definitely something to ponder, isn't it, as you think about your own strategy in, let's face it, an uncertain world.
Absolutely. Lots to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.